The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 192. This Sunday at Crisler Center, the Wolverines and Spartans will do battle to decide first place in the Big Ten, at least for now. And Team 135 takes to the practice field next Tuesday as spring practice gets underway. That and more on this week's show. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. It's a busy time of year on the Michigan athletic scene, and we have much to talk about today, so I'll keep it short and sweet on our Wolverine News and Notes. Joining me on our Michigan Game Day segment in just a minute will be basketball beat writer Brendan Quinn from MLive. We'll talk about the disappointing performance on Sunday against Wisconsin, and then get ready for Sunday's big game with Sparty. On last week's show, Tim Sullivan from the Wolverine gave us his take on the football class of 2014. This week, I asked another of our outstanding Michigan football recruiting analysts to give us his roundup on the 16 commits in this very fine class. So after we talk hoops with Brendan Quinn, we'll be joined on a Michigan Gameday Extra segment by Ace Anbender, recruiting analyst from MGoBlog. It's a longer than usual show today, but there is a lot to talk about, so I hope you'll stay with us. Sunday's performance against Wisconsin was disappointing in many ways. We were at home, the game was on national TV, and first place in the Big Ten was there for the taking. But Wisconsin is a darn good team, and there is no time to mope. John Beilein and his team have to be ready right out of the gate on Sunday if we stand a chance of hanging around with and beating Sparty. We'll talk about that and more next on Michigan Game Day with basketball beat writer Brendan Quinn from MLive, here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Here with us on Michigan Game Day this week, Michigan basketball beat writer Brendan Quinn from MLive. Great to have you back on the show, Brendan.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Well, it was a disappointing home loss to Wisconsin at Crisler on Sunday, Brendan. As you mentioned, the big crowd was there. CBS was there. It was a big game, so everyone was jacked up. Difficult to explain the lack of energy and effort we saw early in this ball game, wasn't it?
It was, right from the opening gates. I think it was kind of everyone looking at each other, just saying, at least kind of sitting up amongst my fellow beat writers up top at Crisler. A very unexpected early kind of, I don't know, I forget how I worded it in the story. They just kind of tripped, stumbled, and fell right out of the gates. And speaking with John Horford after the game, he completely acknowledged the fact that it was energy and effort early just weren't there. They just didn't match Wisconsin. That dictated the rest of the game. You can't, the way Wisconsin's playing right now, it's the same team that beat Michigan State last week. You can't just spot them 10 points right out of the gates, falling down 12-2, 14-4, and expect to sustain a comeback over the course of that game. It just wasn't happening in the second half. You saw they exerted so much energy and effort coming back, ironically, that didn't have enough maybe to finish the last 6 minutes.
And Brendan, it's one of those things when you hear John Horford and you heard Stauskas say that there was just a lack of energy in those first 10 minutes. Collectively as a team, it's hard to explain how that happens when you have such a big game to play.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to ask Nick that same question of, is there a why? Is there an actual answer to why those first 10 minutes the team just didn't look like themselves, didn't have the approach that you would expect for a game of that magnitude? And he kind of said, I'd like to be able to put my finger on it, but some things, don't have an explanation that is that clear cut. And I don't know if that's disconcerting. I don't know what exactly to read into it. Maybe over the course of a 30-something game season, these things happen. I think the most telling quote from all of yesterday probably also came from John Horford. I'm trying to dig it up for you right now. And when I asked him about energy and effort and why, he said, that's something you have to force out of yourself sometimes. The energy isn't always going to be there. You're going to have days when you don't feel it. And if you can't do it for yourself, can't produce the energy yourself, then produce it for your teammates, and know if you're not coming out and putting in the effort, you're letting people down. So I think there's a lot of ways you can read into that. It seemed like it was kind of directed toward a singular message that you don't know if it's to people individually or people to the team, but I think that kind of speaks volumes for how or what they lacked early in that game.
Yeah, I think you're right on. That was a very good statement by John Horford. To be fair, though, this Wisconsin team is a team coming off, as you mentioned, a victory over Michigan State last week. They are very good. I mean, by halftime, you saw Sam Decker already over his season average, and Kaminsky was playing out of his mind. They look to be a team that, as we said, is very good, and they're peaking at just the right time.
They are very good, and the thing is that when Wisconsin is clicking the way that they were yesterday, they actually look a lot like Michigan does when they're clicking, because there's pieces and weapons all over the floor. You forget that Trayvon Jackson is on Wisconsin. I think he's a great player. He went 1 for 6 yesterday. He didn't really do much, and they still played as well as they did. You have a guy in Nigel Hayes coming off the bench who right now is probably the leading candidate for Sixth Man of the Year. I don't even know if they give out Sixth Man of the Year in the Big Ten, but if they do, he's probably the best candidate for it. He's really emerged as a solid 6'7" freshman, really nice player, and he was quiet yesterday. He went 1 for 6 from the field. But when you have Bruss hitting threes, you have Decker playing inside outside, you have Josh Gasser hitting that, of all guys to hit a dagger 3-pointer late in that game, Josh Gasser hits it from the corner. So yeah, I mean, they did it. You're absolutely right. That is a really good team that is going to give a lot of teams fits here through the close of the Big Ten, maybe into March. I mean, as everyone knows, Wisconsin, it's a matter of matchups when it gets to them in the tournament, but the NCAA tournament. But yeah, that's a really, at the end of the day, that's a top 15 team.
Oh, absolutely. They have all of the pieces. I guess when you look back on this one, you can say it's a loss. It wasn't, as you said, a demoralizing or maybe even a bad loss. But if you had to put a label on this one at the end of the day after watching that game, I think disappointing is what you'd have to say.
Yeah, that's kind of how I walked away with it. And like I mentioned in my column, when you do something bad and you're a kid or a teenager and you get in a little bit of trouble and you have the conversation with your parents, your mom or dad kind of gives you that deep look, it kind of looks right through you and says, I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. And just how much, that just feels so much worse, as a kid or a teenager or whatever. And that's kind of the point with this loss to Wisconsin. That was a game that if they had just shown up early, you'd be interested to see how that game would have went. They very well might have still lost. But if they had just shown up and at least matched Wisconsin's approach to the game, there would have been a completely different afternoon. And I think that's something that can fester and maybe, make for an interesting week of practice with 6 days between games.
Oh, I think absolutely it will. When you look back in the game, though, a bright spot, maybe the lone bright spot, Karis LeVert, he just played like a man possessed in the second half comeback. And he seems to just be getting better and better and more confidence each time out, doesn't he?
Yeah, and the interesting thing with Karis is that for anyone that has seen him at a press conference or spoken to him directly, he is this super soft-spoken, monotone, relaxed young man. He kind of just is very methodical in everything he does and says. Doesn't show you much of his personality. And for a kid like that to be the one that when the offense turns stagnant has multiple times this year been the one to just kind of take the ball. He just takes it upon himself and says, all right, if no one's going to do it, I'll do it. And, he did it at Duke. He's done it in a couple Big Ten games, scored 15 second-half points yesterday. And, yeah, he's got that offensive skill set that when nothing's working, you can just put the ball in his hands and let him go. And there were a couple times, he just embarrassed Trayvon Jackson off the dribble a couple times. And now sometimes, in my opinion, I think he can get a little bit dribble happy when he does get the ball, and he can start, splintering the hardwood by just pounding it and kind of going in circles, but never going forward. When there's nothing else going, and when you get a combined 5 of 24 shooting from Nick Baumgardner and Derek Walton and Zach Irvin, you need somebody to do something. And Caris LeVert, to his credit, is more than willing to do that when called upon.
Oh, absolutely. As Bo Ryan said when he was asked after the game Sunday, what were your plans to defend him? And he said, just hope that it stops. He said, when he's a guy's in his zone like that, there's not much you can do. If we could just wrap up on the Wisconsin loss, then, Brendan, if you could recap for us Quinn's 3 keys, why Michigan did lose that game.
Well, I started off with that sluggish start, not matching the energy and effort level, and just digging a deep hole against a really good team playing with a lot of confidence. And to do that at home, I think is probably the most disappointing part. That's their first. They were the only Big Ten team without a home loss before yesterday, and to come out flat like that at home, I think is pretty disappointing for Michigan fans. Team number 2 was defending Frank Kaminsky. Never really made any adjustments in terms of how they defended him. He was catching entry passes free and open. He was giving space away from the basket. A lot of times he was catching the ball 10, 12 feet, being able to put the ball on the floor, make a move, settle himself, gather himself. And they never really did much to impede him, and he made him pay to the tune of 25 points. And number 3 was that backcourt production, or lack thereof, from players outside of Caris LeVert, like I mentioned. Either 5 for 24 or 4 for 25 combined shooting from Walton Southgate and Zach Irvin. This is a perimeter-based team that needs perimeter scoring. If they're not going to get it, they're not going to beat a top 15 team. Our
guest here on our Michigan Game Day segment today, Michigan basketball beat writer Brendan Quinn from MLive. Well, Brendan, now we have a week to get ready for the Michigan State matchup next Sunday at Crisler. It's going to be national TV. Spartans did us a favor by falling to Nebraska Sunday at home, a Nebraska team that's really improved this year. I don't think a lack of energy or effort is going to be a problem next Sunday, do you?
I can't imagine. If it is, then there's some serious issues. No, the place is going to be a madhouse. Michigan has a full week to stew over this game, whereas Michigan State will be playing Purdue on Thursday. And you wonder who has the advantage there. Both teams are going to be coming off losses. Purdue or Michigan State gets to get back on the floor early, whereas Michigan gets some time away here. Given how Michigan played and how they shot, I think some time away will probably be a good thing. And with Michigan State, because they lost to a team that they flat out should not have lost to. They were a 13 or 14 point favorite. They're better. Nebraska is really a gritty team with a lot of nice pieces, and then a star in Taryn Petaway, but they're not at Michigan State's level. And for them to go into Crisler in the middle of February and win a game with what Michigan State had riding on that is bad. And so I think for them, the best case scenario is to get back on the floor as soon as possible and get that taste out of their mouth, and maybe get some good vibes going again. So, yeah, maybe I'm just looking at a glass half full, which is not my style, actually, for both teams. But, yeah, I think it kind of works out for both of them to potentially come into the game kind of at the right place, maybe mentally. Now, who jumps out will be interesting.
Well, in your column, your MLive column on Monday, you wrote that, now Michigan has something to be mad about after that performance against Wisconsin, and that maybe a new side of this Michigan team will emerge, an angry side. Well, they'll certainly need that kind of an angry attitude and more to bring down a Michigan State team that we'll find out Thursday what happens against Purdue. But this is a team that's getting healthier, and they're going to be ready for this game, and they're going to need that kind of an angry edge to win at home against this team.
I would think so, and I don't know if if you would disagree with me or anything, in terms of that, this is a team that just kind of shows up and plays. I'm talking about Michigan. They just kind of show up and play well and stick to the system. But maybe it's because Mitch McGarry hasn't been out there. He doesn't have that energy, that kind of rally the troops and get them all fired up. You just don't really. They've won a lot of nice games. Don't get me wrong, but I just haven't seen them come out and kind of have that. I'm gonna knock you down in this game, and I haven't really seen that from them that much. So that was kind of my point I was making is, if it's going to happen, if this team has that side to it somewhere, you have to imagine that this could be it. This is when you might see it.
I know it's early in the week, Brendan, and you maybe haven't had time to think about this yet, but what are Quinn's 3 keys for a Michigan victory on Sunday against Sparty?
Oh, geez. Well, coming off of what Frank Kaminsky just did to Michigan, I'd probably have to start with defending Adrian Payne and having to figure out a way to not let him engage the offense, whether that means fronting him, denying entry passes, getting in his passing lanes, doubling down when he does get the ball, pushing him out as far as you can from the paint. There's going to need to be some plan other than what they just did against Frank Kaminsky. Because while Kaminsky's a nice player, Adrian Payne's one of the best in the country in terms of big men. Number 2, I think, is going to be a bounce back by Derek Walton. Obviously, as he was the last Michigan State game, I still think was kind of his coming out party. If I'm correct, I think it was 19 points, just flat out outplayed, dabbling up and down the floor. Maybe you don't get 19 points from him, but what you saw yesterday, there were some unforced turnovers for him. He never really geared up that offense yesterday. I'd say a bounce-back performance from Walton. You can't have your point guard go 1 for 6 from the field and have turnovers. So I look for him to come back. And the other one is going to be, as much of a cop-out as this is, but you have to be able to make shots. And Michigan didn't make shots yesterday. Nick Stauskas went without a three-pointer. Glenn hit a couple decent mid-range jumpers, but other than that, there was really just no shot making. As simple as that sounds, and you're going to need to score points to beat Michigan State and to shoot over that defense. Because you're not going to get a lot of second chance opportunities on offensive rebounds, and it's going to probably be. I think this game will be a little bit slower than the last one. So, making in a game that is based on tempo, you got to make shots, and I would look for that next Sunday.
Well, our guest here with us on Michigan Game Day this week has been Michigan basketball beat writer Brendan Quinn from MLive, and follow Brendan all week on MLive as we build to this big game on Sunday at Crisler Center. It's going to be a lot of fun, national TV audience, a jacked up crowd, and as we mentioned a few minutes ago, I don't think we're going to see any problem with effort or concentration coming out of the gate. So, Brendan, again, we'll follow what you have to say this week on MLive, and in a couple of weeks, get you back on the show. As always, thanks for your time.
Much appreciated. Thanks for having me.
I know Michigan fans never get enough recruiting news, so this week on our Michigan Game Day Extra, we're going to be joined by Ace Anbender, who is the recruiting analyst from MGoBlog. That's coming up next here on the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. With us on our Michigan Game Day Extra today, talking more recruiting about our recently signed 2014 class, recruiting analyst Ace Anbender from MGoBlog. Great to have you back on the show, Ace.
Thanks for having me on. It's always good to be here.
The recruiting class of 2014 has been in the news the last week or so as we've been dissecting it and breaking it down. Before we get to that, though, Ace, news on the injury front this past week, which was not good. Tight end Jake Butt out indefinitely with a torn ACL. That is an injury that hurts, isn't it?
Absolutely, especially since Michigan was really relying on him to be really the starter at tight end, because Devin Funchess is very much a wide receiver at this point. He is not playing much with his hand in the ground. A.J. Williams and Jordan Pascors are the other options with any sort of experience whatsoever, and they're not really pass catchers. They're not really close to all-around tight end that Jake Butt is, even though Butt's only heading into his sophomore year. And the guys coming in behind, coming off red shirts, Khalid Hill, he's not really the put your hand down in the dirt kind of tight end that Jake Butt is. He's more of an H-back, so it's going to be, they're going to need Ian Bunting, the freshman, to step in and make an immediate impact, which could be tough because he's a lot like Funchess was when he was coming in as a freshman, or they're just going to be pretty thin at tight end and have to kind of de-emphasize the position until, hopefully Jake can make a recovery similar to what Jake Ryan did last year. But even so, that puts him around in October return where he's got to play his way back into full form throughout the year. So it's definitely an injury that hurts and one that happened at a position group that couldn't really afford it.
I guess if there's anything good about it, well, there's nothing good about it, but spring practice starts in about a week and a half, so Coach Hoke and the staff know what they're up against, so they can start preparing now.
Absolutely. We'll see if any position changes happen. One player I'd keep an eye on there is Wyatt Shulman, who was recruited as a running back, fullback type, and also had played a little H-back in high school, and apparently has very good hands, so he could be a guy who makes a move. He's certainly got the size to go down there and at the very least be a pretty strong blocker at the point of attack. So he's another guy coming off a red shirt who could see a lot bigger role now with Butt being out indefinitely at this point.
Well, a lot to keep an eye on with spring practice just a week and a half away. So right now, let's turn our attention again to what I think was a very good recruiting class for 2014. And Ace, let's start on the offensive side and get your take on some of these guys. Very nice receiving core. We have an early enrollee, Freddie Canteen, 6'1", 170. He's out of Elkton, Maryland, Eastern Christian Academy. So he's going to get an early jump and look too, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a really interesting prospect because he plays at a school, Eastern Christian Academy, that isn't really a high school as much as it is kind of a football prep school where they take online classes and football is really the focus. It's a tiny little magnet school that's entirely focused around the football team. So he was very much off the recruiting radar because Eastern Christian Academy didn't play a game against kind of high school competition during his entire junior season for a few different reasons, but they ended up spending the whole year practicing and going to camp, so he didn't have any sort of film to watch and was very much off the recruiting radar. And then him and his teammate Brandon Watson started going to all of these team camps and really blew up, started bringing in offers, and luckily for Michigan, the Michigan camp was one of the first they went to and one of the first major offers each of them got, and they jumped on that. And Canteen is a guy who can come in and play right away. He's got incredibly advanced route running skills for an incoming freshman, very good top-end speed, nice hands, and you mentioned he's 6'1", but he's a guy who projects to go in and play at the slot, so he's got pretty nice size for that position, and if they need him to move to the outside, they can have him shift out there too. But of the three receivers coming in, I think he's actually got the best chance of coming in and playing right away, and I really like him as a pickup. Michigan got in on him early, and his recruiting rankings kept rising and rising as his senior year went on.
Well, the one theme in this group of three receivers is that they're tall and rangy, which you can tell is what Coach Hoke is going after. The next is Drake Harris, another early enrollee, and a kid that those of us living in-state have heard about for years now, 6'4", listed at 170. He played at Grand Rapids Christian, actually didn't play his senior year, but everyone is anxiously awaiting to see Drake, aren't they?
Absolutely. He's you take one look at his highlight tape, and it's electric. There's a lot in there reminiscent of Braylon Edwards in terms of their Grand Rapids Christian's game plan during his junior year was pretty much just to chuck up deep balls in his direction and just let him out-jump defensive backs for the football. A lot of it looked like basketball rebounding out there, but he's got great skills on the ball in the air. He's got really nice deep speed, and that 6'4" frame that's really coveted, and that like you said, that the coaches are really looking for at this point. These tall, rangy receivers. So he was, not only was he a big play threat, but he was one of the most productive receivers that you'll find at the high school level. In his junior year, he caught 91 passes for over 2,000 yards and 25 touchdowns, and that included an enormous performance in the state title game. So even though he missed the last year, his rankings didn't even drop that much, which is highly unusual for a player who doesn't play their entire senior season, because what he put on tape to that point and what he'd shown in terms of his potential, it was too much for the recruiting services to really bump him down a lot. Despite the injury, the lowest ranking he had on any of the 4 recruiting services was 115th overall, which is still pretty darn good. So he's another player where if he is fully recovered from that hamstring injury that kept him out of his senior season, another guy who could come in and play right away, even though Michigan is actually looking pretty good in terms of depth at wide receiver at this point. So hopefully there's not much of a need for an outside receiver to play as a true freshman, but if there is, he's certainly up to the task if he's healthy.
And the third receiver is a local kid who I don't know if we should say he has flown under the radar or he could be a sleeper, but a lot of coaches in Metro Detroit really like Maurice Ways. He's 6'3", 192, and again played his prep ball at Detroit Country Day.
Yeah, he's one of the players who made a really huge leap between his junior and senior seasons, and then made the coaches look pretty darn smart in offering him between those 2 years. He started out as a pretty middling 3-star guy just about everywhere if he was ranked at all, and ended up a 4-star at least on ESPN. And if you look at the difference between his junior highlight reel and his senior highlight reel, it's huge in terms of the progression he made, in terms of his build, in terms of his catching ability. That was one thing he was really fighting as a junior and got much, much better as a senior. His blocking improved, his route running improved. Just everything really came together for him as a senior. And he was lucky to have a good quarterback, too, throwing him the rock and Tyler Weavers. So he got to really show off what he was capable of doing, and it looks like Michigan really got a steal here. I love his size. I love his ability to make catches underneath or go over the top, and use his frame to kind of box out defensive backs and go up for the football and high point it. So I really think this might be the strongest position group in this entire class, because I'm a big fan of all 3 of the guys that Michigan's bringing in here at wide receiver.
Yeah, very nice group of wide receivers. And again, as we said, we want to get bigger, rangier, and we've done that with these 3 kids. The tight end position, well, it's in flux now, of course, with Jake Butt being injured. And the hope was that Ian Bunting, our 6'7", 223-pounder from Hinsdale, Illinois, would come in and be able to redshirt, but that might not be the case.
Yeah, it looks like there's a chance he's going to have to see the field early, which is kind of too bad considering and his size. He played mostly wide receiver in high school. He started transitioning as a senior once he knew that Michigan was looking to have him play at tight end. Started playing a little bit more with his hand in the dirt, but for the most part, even in high school, he was playing a lot like how Michigan uses Devin Funchess right now, which is just lining him up on the outside, and he's got a good amount of speed for his size. I mean, he's huge at 6'7". He's even bigger than Funchess, and he's got these enormous hands where it's hard to even conceive of him dropping a football when you see his mitts around a football. It's pretty remarkable. But at this point, it'll be interesting to see what Michigan does with him this year, because he's going to have to put on a lot of weight in a short period of time if they want him to be down on the line. Otherwise, he's basically an extra wide receiver at this point who may be able to contribute as an H-back, but he's just so thin and inexperienced as a true tight end at this point that it's tough to see him being able to make a huge contribution as a freshman, but his potential down the road as either a receiving tight end or just an enormous wide receiver in the Funchess mold is huge because he's got this enormous frame and great hands where I think he can make a really big impact.
Well, two things you noticed about watching his recruiting videos. A lot of the time he was split out. They moved him around on the field, his team, Hinsdale High School, and that he's very fluid. I know he's big, 6'7", 223, but he moves like a wide receiver.
Absolutely. His athleticism and fluidity is remarkable for a tight end of his size, and really it's almost unfair to call him a tight end because he really can play wide receiver and be a true wide receiver like Devin Funchess is, where both those guys, I keep harping on that comparison, but I think it's a great one because both of them had very similar roles in high school, and now in college they've got the same kind of size, same kind of skill set and that athleticism that you just don't expect to see from a player who's that big.
Well, continuing with our look at the offensive class here in this 2014 recruiting season, let's look at Mason Cole. He's a 6'5" kid, 284 pounds. He's out of Tarpon Springs, Florida. And what you hear about this kid is he plays nasty.
Yes, and you could see that in the Army All-American game where he was one of the top performers there. He had a couple of pretty impressive pancake block finishes in that one, including one on the goal line where he put a guy flat on his back. He plays with an edge. He's got solid strength for a player who's at 6'4", not the ideal size for an offensive lineman, but he should be able to play guard without any problem, and if Michigan needs it, he could even probably slide out to right tackle without much issue. And his Army All-American performance pretty much cemented him as a top 250 overall recruit in the country, and as high as number 87, which is what 247 had him at, as the number 4 offensive guard in the country. And the services that looked at him as a guard purely tended to have him ranked higher, and that's where Michigan's probably going to put him. So he's a really quality recruit. This obviously is not a large offensive line class, but in terms of bringing in a guy who's the variance in terms of what you're expecting out of him is pretty low with Mason Cole. You kind of know what you're getting here in terms of a matcher up front who can come in and play guard. And for when you're taking so few linemen in a class, it's important to be able to have a guy who you're going to expect to hit on. And I think with Cole, that's exactly what Michigan has.
The other offensive lineman in this class, Ace, was Juwan Bushell-Beatty, and we'll talk about his teammate who came along in the package in just a couple of minutes. He's 6'5", 295, out of Paramus, New Jersey, Paramus Catholic, another big kid that will probably redshirt.
Yeah, he is a deadlock to redshirt, and he's kind of in the Logan Tooley-Tillman mold of a prototypical tackle prospect who is a little late in learning the position, has a lot of work to do on the technical side of things, and a lot of work to do in kind of remolding his body. He played in the Under Armour game. It looked like at about 320, 330 pounds, and he's going to have to. It wasn't all good weight, and it showed in that game. He got beat off the edge pretty badly a couple times and struggled against some of the nation's top pass rushers, which wasn't particularly unexpected considering the competition and where he's at in his development. But he's a player who you hope you can afford to redshirt and season him for a couple seasons behind as a backup before putting him on the field. But the potential there, I mean, for a guy who's 6'7", and once he gets his weight in line, where hopefully he's at probably around 310 or 320, but completely rebuilt in terms of in terms of his mold. He's got a lot of potential. So this is definitely the swing for the fences prospect out of the 2-0 linemen. But at tackle, I mean, that's kind of what Michigan's looking for and has been are those real prototypes where if you take enough of them, you just need 2 of those guys to work out to have a pretty dynamite bookends to your line. So that's the hope here for Michigan.
The last of the offensive commits in this Class Ace is Wilton Spate. He's a 6'6", 243-pound quarterback out of Richmond, Virginia. He played at the collegiate school He's a guy that a couple of years ago when he committed, a lot of people said, who is this guy? But he has since then skyrocketed up in the ranking services and drawn comparisons to Ben Roethlisberger. He's a quarterback, a big quarterback we haven't seen the likes of in quite a while here.
Yeah, he's definitely of the old school Michigan quarterback mold, and it fits for him. He's got a lot of John Navarre in him with the size and the arm strength and what he brings in terms of his style. But then Roethlisberger comparison is one that came from his quarterbacks coach, Steve Clarkson, who Al Borges had worked with closely and really trusted in terms of picking which quarterbacks to offer. I believe Shane Morris worked with Clarkson a little bit at one point, and I know David Sills, whom Borges offered in the 2015 class before he was fired, also works for Clarkson. So this was a quarterbacks coach that he really trusts. But for better or for worse, I guess, with the coach who's now not on the coaching staff, but Spate was in one of the earliest commitments in this class and an integral part of bringing this class together. And he's got a lot of potential for a guy his size, and he's got kind of an interesting throwing motion. It's a little bit sidearm, kind of reminiscent of Phillip Rivers, the San Diego Chargers, but you can get away with that a little bit when you're 6'6", and he can really wing it down the field. His accuracy, he's still got a little bit of work to do there. We saw in the Under Armour game he was a little bit off, not quite in sync with his receivers, which happens a lot in those All-Star games where you only have a week to prepare. But accuracy, there was also some room for improvement there. But he should be able to come in and redshirt, assuming that Devin Gardner and Shane Morris stay healthy. And after that, should be able to be behind Morris for a couple of years before stepping into the starting job. And he's a guy who could definitely be a starter after a couple of years of development. So we'll see. There's a pretty big split in his rankings. ESPN, which it's worth pointing out, does put on the Under Armour game, and that's the game that State played in, is the service that ranks him highest at 257 overall. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got Rivals, which has him as a 3-star and didn't even rank him as a pro-style quarterback. So there's a pretty big spread here in terms of what the analysts think of him, but the potential is certainly there with his frame and his arm strength and his ability to, even though he's not a mobile guy in terms of being a threat to run downfield, he's got a really good sense of when to move around in the pocket, and with his size, like Roethlisberger, he can sort of shed tackles if guys don't hit him square. So I like what he can do as a downfield passer and what he can potentially bring to the offense.
With us on our Michigan Gameday Extra this week is a recruiting analyst, Ace Anbender from MGoBlog, as we wrap up or review the class of 2014. We've just spent some time on the offense, Ace, so let's move over to the defensive side and start with the linebacking core, and this is really a nice group of linebackers. Let's start with the first commit in this class, Michael Ferns. He's a 6'3", 235-pounder out of St. Clairsville, Ohio, St. Clairsville High School. He looks like he's ready to go now.
Absolutely. He's got the size to hit the field right away, and even though Michigan probably won't need him to at linebacker, if they need a kind of like what they did with Ben Gettyan last year, where they sort of worked him into the rotation as the season went on and started to get him some playing experience. Ferns is a guy who you could see definitely play that role where he starts getting some snaps as the season goes on. He played very well last year, even though he was fighting through a shoulder injury for most of the season. It actually held him out of the Under Armour All-American game. His highlights are very impressive in terms of what he can do athletically. Not only was he a very good middle linebacker, but he also played running back. He really did a little bit of everything for St. Clairsville. Went out and lined up at H-back and ran out and caught passes. He did just about everything, and it speaks to what kind of an athlete it is that he was able to play so many different roles for them. So I think he's definitely a downhill thumper. as a middle linebacker prospect with that kind of size. And the recruiting services, there's not a lot of spread there. They've got him pegged as firmly in the 4-star range and among the top 300 recruits in the country. So considering he committed so early, to stay on the recruiting radar like that and not slide down is a pretty good sign. So I like Ferns as a prospect. I think he's got a lot going for him between his size and his athleticism. It seems to fit perfectly for that middle linebacker spot.
Well, number 2 on of the linebackers that committed is Chase Winovich. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, actually. He's a kid who I guess everyone thought early in the process was leaning towards Ohio State, but became friends with Michael Ferns at some of the camps and committed to Michigan. 6'3", 216 pounds. He looks like he moves very well and has a good upside.
Yeah, he's probably slotted for that strong side linebacker spot because his edge rushing is really impressive. He has a burst off the snap where he identifies the play and gets moving. And that's what you want out of your strong side linebacker. You need a guy who's going to be able to get to the quarterback, and his highlight film is a lot of him impacting a quarterback before the quarterback really knows what's going on. So there's definitely potential there. He's got the right size for it, being 6'4", and with the frame to add on a lot of size. And he's not ideal strong side linebacker size right now, but Michigan doesn't need him to step in and play there right away. And he'll be able to get up to 240, 250, I think, without too much issue. And at that point, if he can maintain his level of athleticism, his ability to get to the quarterback from that spot, he'll at least be a situational player, and I think there's potential there for a lot more.
Well, our next linebacker is Noah Furbush, who looks like a tough kid. Another big one who can really put on the weight, you would think. 6'4", already 229 pounds. He's from Kenton, Ohio, went to Kenton High School.
Yeah, and Furbush actually cut down to 229. He was at about 240 as a high school junior, so this is going to be really interesting to see where he ends up, because the Michigan coaches are saying they recruited him as a middle linebacker. They even talked about playing him on the weak side, which has the most pass defense responsibility, coverage responsibility of any of the linebacker spots in Michigan system. But when I look at the guy, he's either a strong side linebacker or even a potential weak side defensive end, because I don't know how they're going to be able to keep the weight off of him where they're maximizing what he's able to do with his frame and his skill set. He's just huge for an inside linebacker. So if they're able to shoehorn him in there and have this enormous guy who's also good in coverage, that would be great. But he isn't the most fluid athlete that you'd want dropping into coverage from the linebacker spot. He's more reminiscent of, say, Desmond Morgan and James Ross in that regard, where the lateral athleticism isn't necessarily what you want it to be for a guy who has to get back into his own drop, which is another reason why I think he's going to end up either on the strong side or even with his hand in the dirt, because he's another guy who gets off the ball quickly, can get to the quarterback, and I just see with his frame, and not many guys are 240 pounds of good weight as a high school junior and end up playing linebacker in college. So we'll see with Furbush. I think there's a bit of a disparity between what the coaches are saying and what's going to actually end up happening with him.
Well, the last of our linebackers was originally a Penn State commit. Michigan State also offered him, but he is a Michigan legacy. Jared Wangler, who even played, I believe, in the secondary most of his senior year at Warren De La Salle High School, right now listed as a 6'2", 215-pounder.
Yeah, he played safety for most of his high school career. Got a little bit of experience at linebacker, and Michigan expects him to come in. He's pegged purely as an outside linebacker because he is smaller than the rest of the guys coming in who are projected to play linebacker at 6'1". And there's a couple of possibilities for him. He's got great coverage skills for a linebacker, and because of that, we could see him end up as the weak side linebacker, where, like I said, he's got the most coverage responsibility of any of the three linebacker spots. Or Michigan could use him as a strong side linebacker, kind of in the Stevie Brown mold, where you can line him up over a slot receiver and have a guy who can at least drop into zone coverage well and even hang with receivers a little bit in man coverage, while still providing solid run support. So he's a pretty versatile prospect. Obviously not the biggest name on this list in terms of the recruiting rankings. He's a 3-star across the board, even on ESPN, which put him in the Under Armour game. And it'll be interesting to see where he ends up too, because he could be playing on the inside at that will spot and being mostly a coverage guy, and then working on slicing downhill and being a good player in run support, or more of a situational guy at the Sam. But one area where I think he could make an immediate impact is on special teams. That's something that I believe the coaches have brought up before, and that when you look at what he's capable of doing, flowing downhill and laying hits on guys, it seems like he's got a role kind of readily carved out as a special teams player. And since the coaches almost always have at least one freshman who ends up getting out there on coverage units and burning their red shirt, I would not be surprised if that guy is Wangler this year.
Well, moving to the defensive line, Ace, let's start with Brian Monet, who is another early enrollee. And, man, is this kid big. 6'4", 328 pounds, out of Salt Lake City Highland High School, and he is tough to move off that defensive line, isn't he?
Absolutely. And what's really intriguing about him is his size and athleticism combination when he's at his best, when he's in shape. And he's had his weight fluctuate a little bit in a way that I think has hurt him over the last year. But he was a defensive end 2 years ago, and now he's this enormous nose tackle, and you can see the athleticism from his DE days is still there, even at his nose tackle weight when he was at his peak playing shape during his senior year. He was explosive off the ball, and when you've got that kind of size, it is just really hard to handle as a blocker when you got a guy that big who gets off the ball that quickly and can either just attack you with a power move or make a quick swim move and get by to the quarterback. That's really hard to block. So he did come into the Under Armour game, I would say, overweight and not in ideal playing shape, and he got dropped, depending on where you looked. Went from a guy who looked like he was going to be finishing in the top 50 range overall as a recruit. He ended up 83rd on 247 as his highest rank, and Rivals, kind of surprisingly, and I think a little bit too reactionary, based on just 1 week of practice in a game, dropped him down to their number 23 DT and a 3-star, and solely based on that Under Armour performance. So I thought that was a little unfair to him, and I think there's definitely a lot more potential there than what they're giving him credit for in terms of what he can bring as this just space eater in the middle who can also slice in the backfield and make plays, kind of like what Gabe Watson used to do for Michigan. I think there's a lot there with him. So he's almost certainly a redshirt candidate. I think for them to I think they're going to want Aaron Wellman to kind of remold his body before he gets out and sees significant time. So, but that could happen by this fall, considering he enrolled early. So he was one of the guys where it was important for him to get on campus as soon as he could, and he did. So that's really nice for being able to jumpstart his career, especially with Richard Ash leaving the program and Andre Pipkins coming off of an ACL injury. Nose tackle is in the deepest spot on the team right now. So I think he's kind of a in case of emergency option for this fall, but if he gets into the right kind of shape, he is a player who could at least be a rotation guy early on, and I see a lot of potential as a future potential all-conference guy. I really like what he can bring with his athleticism and size.
The next D lineman, and help me with the pronunciation of this name, Ace, is it Brady Palante?
Yeah, Brady Palante, originally a gray shirt candidate, and then when the class size ended up expanding a little bit, they put him on scholarship for next year. He's kind of a mini Mike Martin in terms of his style as a high school wrestler who's an accomplished high school wrestler who's not the biggest defensive tackle. He's 6'1", 255 or so. But he uses his leverage quite well, which is it's important when you're a 6'1" defensive tackle that you're able to get underneath the pads of offensive linemen, and that's something he can do. Obviously, a developmental prospect, I think, with Michigan initially looking to gray shirt him, but he came along and had a strong senior season, and down the road, I think he can contribute as a 3-tech, or if they really need it in a larger package as a strong side defensive end. But although he seems to be primarily an inside guy, I think the ceiling here is sort of a 3-tech version of Rob Renis, where he kind of just gets underneath guys and pushes them into the backfield and opens things up for the other defensive linemen to make plays. But with his wrestling bona fides and what he's got in terms of how he uses his hands and leverage, if they can really develop that, and the coaches can develop his technique on the defensive line, he's a guy who down the road could definitely contribute.
Well, the last of our defensive line commits, a very interesting kid, Lawrence Marshall, who made great strides between his junior and senior year. He's on the small side right now, 6'4", 230 pounds. At least that's what he's listed at, again, out of Southfield High School.
Yeah, Marshall actually, he bulked up to around, he said he was playing the offense-defense bowl at about 235 or 240 pounds, so he's already angling to be at the right size where he can see the field next year, although with Michigan's depth at weak side defensive end, that should not be necessary. He's a guy who should be redshirted unless there's some catastrophic depth chart issues there, which is not something that's expected at this point. But he's a very explosive athlete off that defensive end spot where he's a very good pass rusher right now. His technique improved a lot from his junior to his senior year. Like you said, he made great strides as a senior, and not only did he make big strides as a pass rusher and continued to show off the athleticism that made him a highly coveted prospect from early on in his career, but he also added a lot in terms of his run supportability, not just chasing down guys from the backside, which is something he is very good at, but also holding the point of attack better than he used to. His leap from his junior to his senior year reminds me a lot of what Taco Charlton did between his junior and senior year before getting to Michigan, where he went from being kind of looked at as this primary, just pure pass rushing prospect to a guy who's very much started to round out his game. And while the pass rushing is certainly still there, he's a more complete football player now. And Michigan should be able to redshirt him, but after that, all bets are off in terms of when he's going to force his way onto the field, because this guy definitely has a lot of potential.
Moving back to the secondary, Ace, we just picked up two kids there. The first is Brandon Watson. He's another early enrollee, 5'11", 185 pounds. He's out of Elkton, Maryland, so he was a teammate of Freddie Canteen. Very interesting prospect.
Yeah, he's quite underrated as a 3-star who's his highest ranking is as the number 41 cornerback on Scout. And like with Canteen, he didn't get to play a junior season, and the only readily available film out there on him is mostly from his sophomore year. But there's one thing that he does better than just about any high school prospect I've seen, and that is jam receivers off the line. He is extremely physical out on the edge, and that his game is to play press coverage, get right up into the wide receiver's grill, and reroute him right off the bat, where you can tell with receivers going up against him when you watch some of the single game highlight cut-ups. He's a frustrating guy to play against because it's just tough to get past him, and it's tough to get into a route against him, let alone then actually make a catch on him. So I really like his potential. Michigan has been very much angling to get more size in their secondary, especially on the edge at corner. And he's physical enough where he could step in and play the boundary corner in a couple of years, where he has that run responsibility that you get by playing that close to the edge and be able to hold up at the point of attack. And he is a very hard hitter too, which is something you don't really see that often out of a high school cornerback. But he really brings the wood. It goes in line with his game as a physical corner. But I really like what his film looks like. He's another player where Michigan got in on him quite early just before his recruitment looked like it was going to blow up. He went to, after picking up the Michigan offer at Michigan's camp, he went to USC's camp with Freddie Canteen, and USC was on the verge of offering him when he ended up committing to Michigan. So he was definitely a guy who was poised to blow up a little bit on the recruiting scene, but once Michigan got his commitment, he wasn't fielding offers, he wasn't taking visits, and that was kind of that in terms of people tracking his recruitment that closely. But I think the rankings belie his potential here, because what he can bring as a physical corner, you just don't see a guy who can jam receivers off the line at this stage in their career like he can. And that's something that, with Michigan looking to be able to play more press coverage in the future, get a little bit more physical on the outside, he really fits in with what Greg Madison's trying to get the defense to do.
Well, another guy that I'm sure is going to fit in with what Greg Madison wants to do is the crown jewel of this class, Jabril Peppers, 6'1", 210 pounds, from Paramus, New Jersey, Paramus Catholic, and of course a teammate of Juwan Bushell-Beatty. And man, is everyone waiting to see Jabril.
Yeah, I think he'd fit in with just about what anybody would want to do with anything on a football field, because he can really do it all. He's going to come into the corner. I think kind of the expectation is that Michigan will start him out in their nickel package, either sliding Blake Countess down into the slot as the nickel like they did with him a little bit last year, or just sticking him on the outside, because he's certainly got the size to do it, and not to mention the athleticism. And it's all about kind of how quickly he's going to be able to pick up the defense and get used to the college game. But it's hard to imagine him not making a major impact next year. I think as the season goes along, he's going to be, if not a starting cornerback, then a guy who's holding down the nickel position at the very least, and he could even factor in to the conversation at safety if Michigan doesn't get the results that they want there, because there's a little bit of uncertainty on the depth chart at that spot, and Michigan didn't bring in a safety in this class, which I think was one or two glaring kind of oversights in terms of rounding out this class this year, unfortunately. But with Peppers, obviously the other area that he can factor in right off the bat is on special teams as a returner. While I really like Dennis Norfleet as a returner, I think you have to get the ball into this kid's hands at some point, and the return game is the obvious area where you can do that as a freshman. I think we're going to eventually see him get some snaps on offense, but I don't know if we'll see that when he's a true freshman very much. I know that the Charles Woodson comparisons are pretty much impossible to avoid, but as a freshman, Woodson mostly focused on defense, which people sometimes forget, and focused almost exclusively on defense. So we'll see with Peppers what his role is this year, but there's no question he's going to make an impact, and his potential is absolutely off the charts. I was actually pretty surprised that he didn't end up being the number one overall recruit, just because of, first of all, the fact that he can play cornerback at the level he does. That's the position that you covet as a guy, being able to play that well that early. And then the fact that he can also play running back, that he can play wide receiver, that he can return kicks, that he can play safety. I was surprised that a pure running back in Leonard Fournette got the call over him, considering Peppers is actually pretty comparable to Fournette just as a pure running back. But there's obviously a lot to be excited about here in terms of what Michigan can do with him, and he is definitely a player who can. One player won't make a class, but Peppers is going to come about as close as you can get to a guy with that level of potential impact.
Most recruiting services have this class third best in the Big Ten, depending on the service, and then nationally the rankings are pretty much all over the map. But in the end, and most importantly, it was a class that it did meet most of Michigan's needs, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I think aside from safety, they really filled every need that they had, and we knew heading into this was going to be a small class, and one relative flaw I would say in the team recruiting rankings on these recruiting services is that they lean a little bit too heavily on class size as a measurement of class quality. And while it's certainly important to bring in as many players as you can fit into the 85 cap, or if you're in the SEC, just fit in as many players as possible and worry about it later. But Michigan, with only 16 commits in the class, they were the highest ranked in terms of the 247 the composite rankings, which combine all four recruiting services into one ranking. They were easily the highest ranked team with only 16 commits. You'd have to go way down the list to number 46, Northwestern, to find the next team with that few number of players in the class. But Michigan all the way up at number 20. So the quality there is high. I would certainly rather have Michigan's class than Tennessee's, which was 33 players, and that really inflated things. But and so they're up at the number 7 class in the country, but they've got 17 3-stars in there, and taking flyers on a lot of guys. And with Michigan, what Brady Hoke has done a remarkably good job of is recruiting players who are not going to wash out. He's had very little in the way of attrition since he's been at Michigan, especially from his players that he's recruited. He's had almost none. And with these guys, they're pretty much to-a-man, high-character guys, high athletic and academic achievers. And in football, where scholarship spots are precious, and you've only got so many shots in any given class to really fill your needs and make sure that depth is going to be there in the future. Being able to retain as much talent as possible is I think, an underrated part of recruiting, where if you're able to get guys who are more likely to be on campus for 4 years, even if that means taking fewer shots at some of the top-end guys, and passing up on some talent to take maybe a lesser talent who's a bit of a safe bet. If that guy ends up being around for 4 or 5 years while the other guys wash out after 1 or 2, that's a win. And so I think that's something that hurts Michigan in the recruiting rankings, but will help them on the field down the road, is that they haven't really had any attrition from Brady Hoke's recruiting classes. And that's going to show up on the depth chart soon in terms of just having a lot of guys at every position, where when you look at this class this year, sure, it's small, but none of these guys are really required to see the field next year. Bunting, that kind of changed recently because of Jake Butt's injury, but other than Peppers just going to see the field pretty much automatically, there's none of these guys where you look at them and go, that guy has to be able to contribute right away, because there is the depth in front of them. So I think, again, aside from safety, which is a little bit of a scary spot right now, although Michigan's got a commitment there already in the 2015 class, and Tyree Cannell and Sean Crawford, corner commit in the 2015 class, could also potentially play safety. I think aside from that, they really filled their needs, and with players who are going to stick around in the program for a long time, and that's big. And I think this class is definitely better than what the team recruiting rankings might lead you to believe.
The other thing is the Malik McDowell recruiting saga. Do you think he ends up at Michigan State, or is there still a chance it's going to be Florida State, Ohio State, or even Michigan?
It'll be interesting to see. I think Michigan is pretty much out of it at this point because his parents, who were so very adamant about him going to Michigan for almost the entirety of the recruiting process, they all of a sudden have very much opened up to where Florida State and Ohio State are getting a lot more mentions. And I think McDowell, if he's going to stay in state, he's going to end up in East Lansing. But at this point, I think it's anybody's guess what's going to happen in this recruitment. This has been one of the more bizarre ones to follow in a long time. And I think normally in these situations, the recruit ends up kind of getting their wish. If a player's dead set on going to a school, at some point it's their decision and the parents end up having to live with it, especially since there are options, even if Malik's mom doesn't sign his letter of intent, which is currently the holdup right now, is she's not willing to sign one that's going to send him to East Lansing. You don't need a letter of intent to enroll at a school and get a scholarship. So once he's 18, and potentially even beforehand, depending on what Michigan State's internal policies are, he can sign a financial aid agreement this summer and be a fully enrolled, full scholarship member of the football team this fall. And that's one way to circumvent the fact that his mom is obviously very adamant that he not go to Michigan State at this point. So we'll see what happens when they go back and take more visits and reevaluate. I think at this point it's a 50-50 toss-up whether he ends up at Michigan State or whether he goes elsewhere. And if he goes elsewhere, it's really up in the air at that point. I think Florida State might end up being kind of a compromise school that satisfies everyone enough, where that's the spot he ends up at. But if I had to put money on one school at this point, I'd say he ends up at Michigan State, just because looking at similar recruitments in the past, usually at some point the recruit ends up getting their wish, and it's pretty obvious that Malik really, really wants to be at Michigan State, be a Spartan, and his parents are and his mom specifically, is what is currently standing in the way of that.
Well, a final question then, Ace. We already have 4 commits. I think it's 4 commits and a couple of notable decommits in the class of 2015, and one of them is Damian Harris from Kentucky. He's going to be in town soon on an unofficial visit. I think it's this Sunday or next Sunday at one of the games. According to his high school coach, Michigan is still number 1 on his list, but it looks like he's going to very much take his time, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, he was actually really the only recruit for whom the Al Borges firing made a really huge impact, because while Borges wasn't that active on the recruiting trail, he was pretty active with Damian Harris, and that was because Harris's high school coach was a grad assistant under Borges at UCLA. They were close. That was both Harris's high school coach and Borges were obviously close, and Harris and Borges were close. And when Borges was fired, Harris, I think, was already having some second thoughts, just because he committed so early and didn't really look at many other schools, didn't take visits, and considering Michigan's performance on the field last year, I think he quite justifiably felt that he, needed to take a step back and at least explore some other options. So Michigan's still the leader, and that's been emphasized at pretty much every turn, that Michigan is still definitely the team to beat for him. They're still his childhood favorite. They still run the system that he wants to be in. He has said in the past that he prefers a pro-style system over a spread offense. So Michigan very much has that going for him. And that's going to be especially important since it looks like this is going to be a Michigan-Ohio State battle. Harris is still picking up offers. Auburn, Miami, and Wisconsin have all offered since he decommitted. But the one visit he's taken since his decommitment, and the first unofficial visit he took in months since his commitment, was to Ohio State for the Michigan-Ohio State basketball game, incidentally. Mm-hmm. So that actually ended up working out okay for Michigan, at least in terms of the results on the court. And I think, given that Ohio State runs a spread, given that Harris was a Michigan fan growing up, I think Michigan still definitely has the edge there. But it definitely looks like it's going to come down to those two schools battling it out, and we'll see. Decommitments don't often recommit to the school that they initially decommitted from, but Harris seems like a special case there, given how early he committed, the interest level he continues to show, and the fact that his decommitment was for some really valid reasons in terms of, with Michigan's no visit policy, he hadn't had a chance to really check out any other school given how early he committed. And just to make sure that he's making the right decision, I think this was the right call for him. And I think ultimately he ends up at Michigan, given the direction that his recruitment appears to be headed, especially with as he gets more and more familiar with Doug Nussmeier, who made a point to go down and visit Harris pretty much right after he was hired. That was one of his first stops on the recruiting trail, was to go down and introduce himself and start building that relationship. So I think once they reach the point where Harris feels comfortable with Nussmeier and maybe waits and sees how that manifests, how the coaching change manifests itself on the field next year, I think he eventually ends up back in the fold.
Our guest here on the show today on our Michigan Gameday Extra has been recruiting analyst Ace Anbender from MGoBlog. And one thing we know, Ace, you know because you do it all year, is the recruiting season never ends. So, and Michigan fans, college football fans just can't get enough recruiting. So hopefully we'll get you back on the show soon and talk about this class of 2015 some more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to be on.
There is a lot going on in the Michigan athletics scene right now. And coming up next on Wolverine Quick Hits, we'll try to round it up for you as we wrap it up for another week here on the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. On Wolverine Quick Hits this week, Andrew Sinelli scored his first goal of the season on U of M's first shot of the game, but the 10th-ranked University of Michigan hockey team fell 4-1 at second-ranked Minnesota on Saturday inside Mariucci Arena. Steve Racine made 20 saves in net for Michigan, which dropped its third straight contest and was swept by the Gophers in the first Big Ten series between the two teams. Michigan will continue Big Ten play against Penn State Friday night at the Yost Ice Arena in a 6:30 p.m. contest. The Wolverines now 14-9-3 on the season, 6-5-1 in the Big Ten. Junior forward Saisha Gori scored 30 points and grabbed 19 rebounds as the University of Michigan women's basketball team hung on for a 70-63 win at Illinois on Sunday afternoon at the State Farm Center. Gori, who was also named the Big Ten Player of the Week, scored her 30 points on 12 for 15 shooting with 19 rebounds, 12 offensive and 7 defensive, to become just the second Wolverine to go for 30 points and 19 boards in a game. Freshman guard Sierra Thompson scored 11 points with 5 assists, and junior guard Shannon Smith chipped in 10 points, 5 boards, and 2 assists. Junior guard Nicole Elmblad scored 8 points with 11 rebounds and 6 assists in 40 minutes of action. Michigan out-rebounded the Illini 48-19, grabbing more offensive rebounds, 21, than Illinois had total rebounds in the game, 19. Michigan returns to action tonight, Wednesday night, at Indiana. Tip-off is set for 7 p.m. The Wolverines 16-10 overall heading into this week's action, 7-6 in the Big Ten. With all of the snow that we've been shoveling here in the Michigan area and the Midwest and the Northeast this winter, it's nice to see softball and baseball getting back into action. The number 6 ranked University of Michigan softball team scored 6 runs in the final 2 innings against Boston College on Sunday to erase a 4-run deficit and go on to win 6-5 in the final day of the Ragin' Cajun Invitational held at Lamson Park in Lafayette, Louisiana. Michigan's offense was held in check until the 6th inning when senior Lindsey Doyle collected the squad's first hit of the game. Romero finished with 2 hits and 2 runs batted in, and Sappingfield scored 2 runs. That's Nicole Sappingfield. U of M used 3 pitchers in the circle, with the win going to Haley Wagner in relief. She pitched 1 inning and gave up 1 hit. Junior Sarah Driesinga started the game and threw 4 innings before being taken out, but she also came back to pitch the 7th inning and preserve the University of Michigan victory. The Wolverines now 7-2 overall and will be back in action this weekend versus Kent State as they start off the FAU Kickoff Classic down in Boca Raton, Florida. And the Wolverines also head into this weekend ranked number 6 in the country. Baseball also got into action last weekend, and the Wolverines tied for the first time since the 2000 season as the Maize and Blue drew with Washington 7-7 on the final day of the Texas State Invitational on Sunday afternoon at Bobcat Ballpark down in San Marcos, Texas. The game went 8 innings before travel curfew ended the contest in a tie. Michigan will return to the Lone Star State this weekend for a 3-game series at Houston. Game 1 is on Friday with a scheduled 6:30 p.m. first pitch at Cougar Field. The Wolverines last weekend went 1-2-1 to start the season. And again, the one game, which was a draw with Washington, very odd, but because both teams had to hit the road and head back to their respective universities. In other news, the number 8 ranked University of Michigan wrestling team won 6 individual matches, including each of the first 5, to knock off number 6 Pittsburgh 18-13 in its season dual meet finale on Saturday at the Panthers' Fitzgerald Fieldhouse. Freshman heavyweight Adam Kuhn from Fowlerville, Michigan, sealed the Wolverine win with a decision in the final match. The Wolverines closed out their dual schedule with an 11-4 record. They earned 7 wins against nationally ranked opponents, including 3 top 10 teams. Michigan will take 3 weeks to prepare for the 2014 Big Ten Championships, scheduled for Saturday and Sunday, March 8th through the 9th in Madison, Wisconsin, hosted, of course, by the University of Wisconsin. The first session is slated for 10 a.m. on Saturday morning at the Kohl Center. The Wolverines ranked number 8 this week with a record of 11-4 overall. Behind an energetic and lively floor exercise rotation, the number 8 ranked University of Michigan's women's gymnastics team went into Lincoln and secured a huge road win over a top 10 team, beating number 7 Nebraska last Friday inside the Devaney Center. The Wolverines handed Nebraska its first loss of the season, while jumping atop the Big Ten regular season standings at 4-0. Michigan's 3-meet road trip concludes this Friday as it competes at the Perfect 10 Challenge in Oklahoma City alongside Oklahoma, currently ranked number 2, Alabama, currently number 5, and West Virginia. The meet will begin at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Michigan 9-0 overall on the season, 4-0 and in first place in the Big Ten. The number 2 ranked University of Michigan men's gymnastics squad, paced by a pair of event titles from graduate student C.K. Cesar and a pair of career highs from junior Nick Hunter, earned a win over the number 10 ranked Nebraska Cornhuskers on Saturday in front of a season-high 912 fans at Cliff Keen Arena. The Wolverines now take a 3-week layoff from full competition. Select team members will take part in the Winter Cup Challenge, February 20th through the 22nd. That's this weekend in Las Vegas. Full team competition commences on March 1st with the Ohio State Invitational. Michigan again ranked number 2 this week, 10-0 overall, 6-0 in the Big Ten. As we know, basketball and hockey is headed down the stretch. Spring football is getting started, and yes, baseball and softball are now underway. It's a busy time of year on the Michigan athletic scene. To stay in the loop, become a member here at GBMW. Visit www.gbmwolverine.com today and sign up for free membership. You'll get email alerts when a story is published, and you can hang around on our message board with other fans and share your thoughts about anything maize and blue. So visit www.gbmwolverine.com and become a member today. Check out my show notes page for information on where and how you can get our show apps, where you'll also find our contact information, If you get the show from iTunes, please take a minute to rate or comment on the show. It really does help us a lot. Thanks again to my guests today, basketball beat writer Brendan Quinn from MLive and recruiting analyst Ace Anbender from MGoBlog. Next week, we hope to have basketball beat writer Rod Beard from the Detroit News on with us. And with spring practice getting started, we'll get football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive on to talk about all that needs to be done this spring, and there is plenty of work to do. Nick is doing a 9-part series right now on spring practice, and it is really good stuff, so check that out on MLive. That'll do it for this week's show. Please tell your friends about us, and make sure you're right back here next week for what I hope will be another interesting show. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue.